You know, marital rape is still kind of legal in some states. Kinda. The only reason why it's even taken kinda seriously is because of Lorena Bobbit. I don't know if you remember her, but she cut her husband's off, threw it out the car window, and now she is a badass. That I'm going to go into this story in a little bit. But the reason why I'm talking about this at all is because this literally came up in France. I'm not even talking about her. I've been talking about her for months. I'm talking about a case that they just reported on it. It's all over the news in the United States about how, oh my gosh, France, what do you mean? What do you mean conjugal duty? You also think of that? So do you. United States, y'all do too, but I'm going to get into that. But first I'm going to talk about the case that is in the news right now. Here's a little preview of all the states that are like, nah, marital rape is like not a big deal. Now, before I get into this case, that literally, like, France is having a moment now. My rose-colored glasses have been removed in terms of like, oh, there's so much more ahead over here. No. Maybe the mothers have more rights. They care about the pelvic floor. They fund, working on that so you don't pee your pants for the rest of your life. That you have a lot of, you have subsidized babysitters. You have maternity leave. You have all these things that are amazing for women, but still got to work on the whole grape culture thing real bad. Because it took a European court to condemn France for this nonsense. Now, before I dig into this and the Bobbit case and how these are all connected, please follow my Patreon. That is how I'm able to do this work and actually make a living. And if you can't afford it, just go over there anyway and join the free tier so that you can at least keep up with me in case the algorithms or these apps disappear or, whatever, shadow ban me. And I have a live coming up in a week on Sunday the 2nd with Evan, the bioethicist, who specializes in misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and how they impact all of us and public health. I can't wait. So let's get into this. The European Court of Human Rights ruled, like, this woman it was over a decade later, finally had somebody be like, yeah, that's not cool. You don't have a marital duty. Now, technically, look at all these green countries, care about marital rape is illegal. But I'm telling y'all, everything is in the details. Everything is in the nuance. Everything is in the things that are not defined outright. That's how they get around these laws. So imagine being a 69-year-old woman doing something like this, having to go to court, the European court, because the several French ones she went to were like, nah. So it was the European Convention on Human Rights, cited Article 8, the respective private and family life, that said basically that they were violating or undermining bodily autonomy. Because, mind you, do you think women are ever going to court and saying this like, he won't fork me? Although, honestly, you have no idea how many women are suffering in marriages where their husbands will not fork them. We don't talk about it because we're not allowed to talk about that. But usually when men complain about this, it's because they're awful. They're awful to their wives. The wives don't want to fork them because they're either acting like a child or just terrible to them. And then they're like, that's not fair. I signed up to have unlimited access to a woman's body because I own her now because of marriage. No. So here's the deal. There's a contradiction in French law. Okay, so she filed her case with this court after exhausting all legal avenues in France. Look at this. She first petitioned for a divorce in 2012. Y'all, it is 2020, 13 years almost. She had cited years of verbal and physical abuse and her ex because he prioritized work. Also, I'm going to get into more about him in a second. And he counterclaimed, saying, no, it's her fault. She won't fork me. He accused her of neglecting the marital duties and violating the duty of mutual respect. Irony, y'all. Through slanderous accusations, even seeking compensation for her alleged disrespect. So she's been through all this, and he's like, no, you owe me money for not forking me and for lying about it. Look at this. The French courts, including the civil court, the Versailles Court of Appeal, and France's highest court, the highest court, ultimately deemed, they use her initials because she's not going public, her refusal to have human relations constituted marital misconduct. Placing full blame for the divorce on her. The highest court in France blamed her for the divorce because she didn't want to fork this man. Now, even though both of their claims for compensation were dismissed, the message was sent. While marital rape has been criminalized since 1990, civil court rulings often perpetuate outdated interpretations of marital obligation. Why? Because the language is vague. So it says the court concluded that the very existence of such a marital obligation ran counter to schmegwell freedom and therefore the right of bodily autonomy. So another part of their statement said any non-consensual act of a sexual nature constituted a form of sexual violence. So you know what? The importance of this is they literally are like making a statement and setting a precedent and basically being like, hey, France, y'all need to like look at your laws because look at these 3 different courts. Even the highest one said that it's her fault they got divorced because she wouldn't fork her husband. Now, all of this around not even a month after the end of this trial, the trial of the century, where Dominique Pelicot had like 100 men come over and grape his wife. And he just took so much pleasure in watching them brutalize her. And whatever, anyway, I've covered that case. Look at the playlist. I don't think I'll ever cover a case like that again because the amount of damage it did to my nervous system and my mental health was like too much. But anyway, it's a lot. The reason why that case is so important, besides everything it talked about, was this is another point. Is like the law needs to change because we do not care about women's rights within marriage. And most rape is between married couples or within partnerships. You know, this idea that some boogeyman is going to come out and attack you doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But the person that you should fear most is the man in your home, the man in your bed. That is the man most likely to grape you. And a lot of times, and some of my mutuals on TikTok have talked about this, I'll try to remember to tag them, is that so many women are getting coerced into schmegs with their husbands just because they're not literally forced through brutality and violence, that it's not considered rape, and it absolutely is. Because so many men think like this. I wash the dishes, I deserve schmegs. I put a ring on that finger, I deserve unlimited access to your body. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, one of the reasons why I will always be grateful to schmegs workers, by the way, which is why I don't allow any harassment of them in my comment section, is because they actually understand a lot of things that we don't. I've interviewed them for articles and stuff like that. And a lot of women's rights come from schmegs workers because they had more freedom than married women did for a long time because they could have their own money. And married women, the police would not come after men who were brutalizing their wives, but they would come after women who that was their business. And the madame called. But that's another video. My mutual Therese has made a video on that, and I probably will myself because, I have a history degree. And I was like, oh, dang, schmegs workers have really been at the front line. So this archaic view of women's rights, feminist organizations have long criticized the French Civil Code for its ambiguous phrasing. Because, like, how do you interpret this? They are enforcing this marital duty thing through the vague language. Article 215 states that the spouses are mutually obligated to a communal life. But they don't say what that means. They don't, you know what I mean? It makes no explicit reference to schmegs, but because it doesn't say anything, this is what happened. This one lawyer specializing in human rights was saying that the French rulings today totally reflect archaic view of women's rights, and this wording needs to be changed. So some of the people are like, okay, I'll get around to it. Yeah, and another one's like, I'll believe it when I see it. Either way, this little article, 215, needs to reflect that women do not owe their spouse schmegs. Because not mentioning it seems to imply that it is, because why? So many men think like this. So many men still think like this. Now, let's look at their marriage, because this follows a very familiar pattern. They got married in 1984, and it deteriorated after the birth of their first child. Again, so much abuse happens when a woman is pregnant or, right after. Again, because men are like, wait, I'm not the center of the world. I'm not the king baby. I have to compete with the literal baby now. Not fair. Years of health issues and abuse culminated in her decision to cease relations in 2004. I'm going to give him a little bit more details in a second. But basically, she said, I could not accept it and leave it at that. When all these French courts were like, nah. And I love that. You don't know her name, so we can't, put graffiti photos of her everywhere. But this is correct. Now, not a whole lot's going to come out of this case, but what it did do is it set that precedent that living together does not imply sleeping together. Do y'all remember, like, my grandpa and grandma, they had separate bedrooms. Like, a lot of, like, God! I really think we need to bring that back, by the way. But this is going to come into play when it comes to Virginia and some of these states and the whole Lorena Bobbit thing. Just hold on a second. So again, even though this doesn't really change much, I love that this woman was like, no, like, I refuse to take responsibility for this marriage ending because I wouldn't fork this man who was beating me and awful to me and wouldn't raise his own children and all this stuff. Now, it sets a crucial legal benchmark. And activists hope that this is also going to help us talk more about consent, because men understand consent. I made a whole video about this. They just don't believe in our entitlement to our own bodies, because they think that our bodies are theirs. They understand consent, because again, just try to for a cishet men, stick your finger up his butt. Try to do it once. They know what consent is. Also, just so you know, I like to cite my sources. This is on France 24. They do the news in both English and French over here. The BBC had some interesting details that I didn't see in the French papers yet, or the ones I saw at least. This was a unanimous decision, love that, and said that France had violated her right to privacy and respect for private family life under European human rights thing. This was dragged out over a decade, and a lot like Gisele, she did all this because she thinks that this is a step forward towards ending grape culture and promoting consent within marriage, which again, this is what we need to be focusing more on. That is why this Gisele case was so important. This is a literal grandma. A grandma, this man, grandpa was doing this to grandma. And like I said, like most of our grandmothers, like, were being held hostage, even though we have this idea of like, oh no, they were there because they couldn't leave. They didn't have money. Somebody who, I've had a lot of stuff happen to me, but the most brutal grape I've ever experienced was with a partner. I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that the worst this could ever happen to me was the man that I'm dating and loved. His limerence, y'all, his limerence. Now, upon reflection, I realized that. And in case you didn't know this, any DV situation, people seem shocked when I was talking about this like 7 years ago. If you are dating a man or married to a man that you're scared of, you can't consent. Even though you may consent sometimes, you're really consenting if you know in the back of your mind that this man is capable of violence and has been capable of violence. So even when you say yes, are you though? Are you? Even if you want it in that moment, even if you're consenting to it in that moment, you know in the back of your mind that it's not going to go over well if you say no. So even when you do want to do it, you're still not fully able to consent because there is a threat of violence. So if any woman that you know who's in a DV relationship, coercive control, there's grape going on. I don't know why we're not talking about that more. So this woman, she lived in Paris. She married her husband in 1984. They had 4 children, including a daughter with a disability who required constant care, the responsibility she took on. So this is another situation where it all makes sense, right? Entitled man now starts doing all this after the first child is born. King baby can't be the king baby anymore. The other one needs a mom, right? So the men are jealous of their own children. I talk about this all the time. And then there's one that has a disability that requires a lot of care. Jealous. You know how men are so jealous of how much women take care of the children because they're like, but what about me? What about me? Their marital relations deteriorated after the birth of the first child in 1992. The woman began experiencing health problems, and in 2002, her husband started physically and verbally abusing her. 2 years later, she stopped having sex with him and petitioned to divorce in 2012. Again, before she refused to have sex with him, how much do you think that, again, and I say this as somebody who realized after the first time my ex, violently did that, even when I went along with it, I was like, but am I really going along? I remember being like, this is kind of a mind fork because I want to connect with this person because I'm still in denial that he hates me and wants me to die. But I also am like, can't say no. So am I really saying yes? This is such a mind fork, y'all. Such a mind fork. And the thing is that this man probably wasn't, he's probably pissed that because she doesn't want to do it and she's not willingly going to do this, that now he has to feel bad about himself. He felt rejected. So she never rejected the divorce, but she disputed, because she requested it too, but she objected to the grounds that it was granted, right? So in 2019, the courts in Versailles rejected her complaints and ruled in favor of her husband. And it took a court in the year 2025, I guess, to say, hey, marrying does not mean agreeing to in the future. And again, the only reason why men think that they deserve sex is because of their entitlement. I've tried all the time. Marriage is the finish line for a lot of men. They're like, oh, I took her on some dates. I convinced her I'm a good guy. Done. I'm done. Where women, I mean, I'm not saying that we aren't also taught that it's the finish line. Woo, I finally got my ring. Look. That's the beginning. And men are like, wait, I don't want to have to do anything. I'm just supposed to be entitled to this stuff. And then they get lazy in the marriages, even if they're not like beating her up and all that stuff. That's why women divorce all the time and stop working. The men are like, why won't you have sex with me? And they're just like, because you act like a child. And they're like, you don't want a fucking child? No. They even said, the court emphasized that agreeing to marry does not mean you have to have sex in the future, and that suggesting otherwise, the ruling said, would effectively deny that marital rape is a serious crime. So they understood the assignment. They understood that if they didn't do this, they are sending a message that marital rape is not a big deal. So again, they're still arguing about this. Oh, consent, what is non-consent? What do you mean? It can be withdrawn. Like, I'm so tired of this conversation, but apparently we're going to have to keep having it until the law reflects it. I'm going to take a minute to brag because I wrote about this for Glamour magazine. I think this was maybe my first article for them out of almost like 19 or 20 articles I wrote for them. And it was because I saw on the news one day, you know, Megyn Kelly. I don't watch Megyn Kelly, but I saw a clip saying, like, what is this about? Where, you remember Suzanne Somers, you know, Thigh Master, Three's Company, whatever. The Gen X will know what I'm talking about. She went on Megyn Kelly, and I hate Megyn Kelly so much. She's one of the God, don't get started on Megyn Kelly. So Suzanne Somers went on there and was like, yeah, my husband, like, forks me while I'm asleep all the time. And I was like, wait, what? On the show, she tells a story about going to Canada, her husband's home country, and talking to a lawyer friend about his current. She said, can you believe it's illegal in Canada to have sex with your wife while she's asleep? Yeah, because that's great. And then she turns to her husband and says, you'd be in jail. he rapes me all the time when I'm asleep. The whole audience cracked up. This scene horrified me. So that's when I was like, fork it. I'm pitching Glamour. And they were like, boom, write it. And that's when I like, a lot of times I'll pitch articles so that I can actually learn stuff too. And I, looked into this, and really it wasn't, spousal rape was like, kind of like not a big deal or kind of okay until 1993, but it's still kind of okay. And I'm going to go into that in a minute. But the Lorena Bobbit story opened up very necessary conversations about marital rape because she whacked off because he'd been raping her all the time, abusing her, brutalizing her. Now, I'm going to go over the states that it's still, like, not as big of a deal in a second. But let's have a refresher on Lorena Bobbit, who, when I was a child, I remember watching this case on TV, along with all the Menendez, the OJ case, like, all this stuff. Court TV was new. But I remember this being such a joke. I'm like, wow, what a crazy work. She just cut it off. Wow, she's crazy. Because I was watching SNL, Saturday Night Live, and all the TV shows, all the late night, they were all making fun of this woman. I actually ended up writing about this in Decider back in 2019 and talked about how all of these, as a child, they were all just making fun of her for being like a calculated, jealous woman enraged over an unsatisfying schmeg's life. So she just cut it off. When really she was a survivor of brutal domestic violence who finally hit her tipping point. So this is the docuseries or whatever. So this was in the New York Times that did a story about Lorena's new show. She really didn't. She wanted nothing to do with the spotlight. It was her ex-husband, who went out and became a porn star uncut, and all kinds of other stuff. I'll get to him in a minute. And Joran Peele is the one who decided to tell her story the way it should have been told all along. Everyone was so obsessed about this poor man and his missing. So people back then only remember the details of the story, which were kind of crazy. You know, she talks about, I'm not a vindictive person. I told them where it was. She's actually really funny, y'all. You should watch the documentary if you haven't already. And it's very well done because it's done by Joran Peele. By them, she means the police, who at 4:30 in the morning were out digging through overgrown roadside grass looking for a missing member. They found it, put it on ice in a big bite hot dog box from nearby 7-Eleven and rushed it to the hospital, where a 9.5-hour feat of plastic surgery to reattach it to the poor man who wanted to unalive this woman. God forbid he doesn't have the thing that he was using to violate her on a regular basis. Now, something, and I'm going to go into this in a minute, how this would play out very differently today. But this woman, she was a young immigrant who endured years of domestic violence, was raped by her husband that night and many nights before, and finally snapped. They always just focused on it. Meaning his, and it's like they all missed or didn't care why I did it. Nobody cared. It was about, oh my God, she did this thing. Now, of course, we didn't really have the language of reactive abuse or whatever it's called, which I don't even like that word because it's usually not abuse. A lot of times it's self-defense. But in this case, they were like, no, look what she did. She's violent. She's the abuser. And until I joined TikTok, I actually felt bad because there was one time with my ex where he was being insane. But he was doing that like cold, like doing the thing where he makes me crazy and then he becomes calm. And so I just remember like doing this on his back, like God, you're driving me crazy. And for years, I felt like maybe I was the abuser, even though he raped me, broke my television by throwing it at me, my VCR, almost drove me off a cliff. And, I endured so much like mental and verbal abuse from this man because I'd done this on his back once. I thought I was abusive maybe until I learned about this. Reactive abuse, whatever. Do they have a new name for this yet? I don't know. Someone tell me. I don't want to lose my train of thought right now. Now, this is her now, okay? Boss. And this guy, so he went on to do 2 more uncut and Franken penis. He became a fixture on the Howard Stern show, of course. And this is what Stern said. I didn't even buy that he was raping her. She's not that great looking. You know who said that too? Trump. She would not be my first choice. Like, of course I didn't grape her. She's not pretty. She did a little bit of press, but she basically didn't want to really do all that. She turned down a $1 million pose for Playboy. Imagine being Playboy and being like, I know, let's get you naked. After all that you've endured. Of course they did. People had approached her for years but they never wanted to focus on the abuse. They wanted this sensational, like she knew that they were going to screw her over in this storytelling. That's why she didn't talk about it really until 2019. Not at this extent. And then of course she had Joran Peele do it, which meant she was in much better hands. Because all these other men, from Charlie Rose's Table and Geraldo, all of them, were that she was some unhinged wife. And that this was part of the gender wars, which again, when you hear men say gender wars, I want you to understand that is a red flag because you can't have a war when one person is being unalived on a regular basis and doesn't have as much power or anything. And like literally the statistics is like, this is not a war. This is not two groups at war. Any man that says a gender war, can we stop with these gender wars? They don't understand patriarchy. That's why there's not a race war. That's why there's not a war in Gaza. You know what I mean? You have one group throwing rocks and the other group with a whole military from the U.S. and all over the world. Blah, that's not a war. So gender wars is BS. One of the filmmakers said that he grew up being taught, like me, that there's some crazy lady, just cut it off. Now look, this is her ex-husband now. Watching him talk about this, I'm glad they interviewed him. But like in one phone interview that the New York Times, like he was on the documentary, I guess the New York Times tried to call, and he was preparing for the Dr. Oz show. Well, we know how Dr. Oz can eat right? And y'all know I told the story. I was on the Dr. Oz show to talk about bed bugs. And that man screwed me over so bad. Again, I don't know if I'll try to link the video. But man, he is such a grifter, man. He planted fake bed bugs in the audience to scare people, and he like squeezed my arm the whole time and wouldn't let me tell my story. So fuck you, Dr. Oz. Also, this dude, the Bobbit, he's also, he didn't really want to talk about the one of his ex-girlfriends who said he had tied her to a bed in an apartment for several days and repeatedly raped her. He was convicted and spent time in jail. But he didn't want to talk about that. It's all made up. It's all made up. I was with a lot of women. I'm a player. And none of them ever complained except that stupid Lorena and Joanna. Them crazy workers. The only reason she made this documentary with Joran Peele is because he told her that one of his missions is to make films that give voices to marginalized people. And was also like honest with her, being like, it's also a crazy story and it's like kind of funny, but I want to tell it from your side, like your side. There's a recent article in USA Today that what would happen if the Lorena trial happened today? Because I'd actually learned while doing this research that I thought a lot of the states had actually cut out the loopholes around marital rape, but no. But first, let's get to what has changed in society. Well, just the way we talk about it, because look at these headlines. A stitch in time, hanging by a thread. These were major outlets like Newsweek and the Washington Post, which I've written a lot for. And then there are all the Saturday Night Live skits. They were joking about this. So the flippant way people were talking about it may not happen in today's world. But it's still there because, like, the president, even though he, with all that people openly, including women, white women, especially, mostly just white women, not just, but mostly white women, voted for this man. Oh, whatever, he's a rapist, who cares? Because a lot of women still operate under this, well, why didn't she leave? Why did she have to cut it off? She could have just left. And men are still using the whole Darvo, like, I'm the victim. Apparently, Joran Bobbit was still saying this on a 2020 interview. She's greedy, selfish, stubborn. She's not the victim. It was a nightmare for me, in my opinion. Even though this man has been accused again for multiple women since this happened. So I'm sorry, if it was just her, I get why people wouldn't believe her. But look at all this. Even though if this was on trial today, she would receive more support from women because women aren't as afraid to talk about this and advocate for this and march for this. But because of social media, this might have actually be harder. Because she would be getting criticized on social media all the time, and there would probably be more backlash and more death threats. So even though, society may have changed the way it looked, like maybe it was not much better today if a story like this came out. And where we are literally today in the United States, this would become a part of an issue because she was an immigrant, born in Ecuador, and raised in Venezuela. She would be risking deportation if she was convicted. Her immigrant status would be polarizing. Where we are now as a nation, thanks to Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, all these male comedians and podcast bros, and thanks to white women voting for this, and thanks to Elon and all those tech bros and Mark and all of them, this is where we're at. This is the conversation we'd be having now. We'd be talking about her being an immigrant rather more than her being a survivor of DV. And they would probably use this as being like, see, even the women who come over here are violent. They're going to hurt your neck off, right? So this was really thought-provoking because I'm like, you know what? This is how the conversation would go now. Because it's always about the immigrants, but they're never talking about white immigrants, by the way. It is always immigrants from Central and South America and Mexico. And basically, if they are brown or black skin, that's who they're never talking about the Europeans over in the United States overstaying their visas. The white Europeans, they're never talking about that. So again, just like in Europe, the immigrant is always a dog whistle for anti-blackness and white supremacy. But that case did do some great things. It may have influenced the Violence Against Women Act, which Congress passed in 1994. And it was the first time the government said that they're going to put resources into intimate partner violence with a focus on criminalization of it. Whereas before it was like, no, like women who are not married are and treated very differently from women who are, as if this is not something that happens most in marriages. They also put in the spotlight that abuse looks different, that psychological aggression and emotional abuse are a big part of this. It is not just about bruises. And I'd argue this is where coercive control, maybe without those exact words, started to enter the conversation and people understanding what DV. And like I say all the time, a man may never lay a hand on you and he is unaliving you slowly, physically assaulting you through your nervous system. Don't take that stuff lightly. So 25 years ago, the focus absolutely would have been more on the physical stuff. And now, especially thanks to YouTube and TikTok and all these other ones, and women are telling their stories, starting to understand that, oh, wow, that is just like the tip of the iceberg. Now, just for a refresher, they both went to trial, but he was acquitted in his assault case. Even though there were 9 women on that trial and 3 men, and they deliberated for less than 4 hours before they found him not guilty. But partly is because they've been arguing about like circumstantial, and they also didn't have all the witnesses that she had in her trial, which was very eye-opening, y'all. Woo! And even though some jurors have been concerned that the verdict would be making this some sort of rallying point that women don't have anywhere to go if they're abused, my guess is it's the women jurors who are doing that. In the end, someone in that room convinced them to stick with the facts instead of making a political statement. So look at this attorney. It was like, you might say these 2 people deserve each other. Like, seriously, the way they talked about this woman back then, which is why I'm so glad Joran Peele made that docuseries. Because here's the thing, she was only 22. I think they'd been married 4 years. She was 22. Y'all, can you imagine being in the spotlight, undergoing all of this, being made fun of on every late night show for months when you're 22 years old after being, and an immigrant, living with a white military man? And you know what I say about military men. I'm not saying that they're all abusers. Obviously, they're not. But the rates of DV in military families, I say this as someone who is, my dad was in Vietnam. I'm telling you, the abuse is rampant because Uncle Sam is going to beat the crap out of them usually. And then they come home and, well, that hierarchy is up here. And the problem is that the Bobbits lived in Virginia. So that did not favor her. When he was charged with marital, Virginia law stated that only 1/2 the couple could only have been raped if the couple did not currently live together or the victim sustained serious physical injury. But this was in the New York Times. So just to give you a little bit more info on this case before I bring it back to all of the laws that are still currently ridiculous in the U.S. So again, I love it how they're just like, oh my God, look at France is doing, y'all. The United States loves to throw stones, right? They talk about child marriage all the time when it comes to like India and other countries, especially the global South, right? And yet, child marriage is totally legal in the United States and a lot of states. Let me know if you want that video. So witnesses testified that John boasted of enjoying brutal, forced with women and repeatedly hit her, pulled her hair, and threw her against the wall before she maimed him. Several of the 11 defense witnesses, defense is her because she was the one, this was her trial, recalled occasions when Mr. Bobbit, angry over his wife's appearance or cooking or purported attentions to other men, beat and humiliated her in public. Others described the aftermath of such episodes where she was hysterical and had bruises on her arms, legs, and head. But this is why he got off. Much of this information was not introduced at his trial at the request of the prosecutor in the case. 2 of the witnesses were men. Like his friends even turned on him. To be men who worked with him and went fishing with him, recalled that he had described he said that he liked to make girls squirm and yell and bleed and make them yell for help. This dude, I love that. This is what we need. More men who are willing to go against the bro code and say all this stuff. Bobbit even said in a court document that he conceded that he had abused his wife physically and emotionally. He circled other things in the report saying he threatened to hit or throw something at her. Again, he wrote this, but this was all left out of his trial. So when he was charged, it was with malicious SA, which carried a lesser penalty. He faced 20 years in prison as opposed to life in prison had he been convicted of rape. So it's no coincidence 1993 is when marital rape was officially illegal in all the states. But you know what when they talk about this marital, conjugal, blah, I don't read the Bible, but you can Google it. Even though this stuff is still, is a crime since 1993, there's still loopholes and exemptions. These are the states. Now, it should be noted that Governor Tim Walz, God, still mourning that. He signed a bill that put an end to the marital rape exception. Oh, look, another cool thing that he did. We could have had this, y'all, but instead we have Vance, whose mamaw tried to burn Papaw alive on the couch by setting it on fire. And God, oh my God, I can't believe we're living in this nightmare, but whatever. Of course we are. So they, like in California, Gavin Newsom is like, they're trying to overturn these, but, and have been signing things. But let me just cover. If you're in one of these states, you should pay attention to this. And also pay attention that, y'all, if you are in an unhappy marriage and you are thinking about leaving, please be serious about no-fault divorce ending probably maybe soon. And also, you're in one of these states, think about this. And this was I don't know what month this was written, but this is 2024. Connecticut. Connecticut has this loophole. If you're not married, you have a bigger sentence. And in Connecticut, and correct me if I'm wrong, y'all. Don't always take everything I say at face value. I'm doing a lot of research, but this is a lot of work, and I may be wrong, okay? But from what I have found, Connecticut does not make a provision if the person is, oh, cool. So Gisele Pelicot would be fine there. So most of the states are using this whole, oh, it's only if force. What is, like, God. Only like physical violence, as if men don't manipulate the crap out of women and do sneaky stuff all the time. I think Maryland is trying to get rid of their exemption, but look at Michigan. This state focuses mostly on marital when the person is incapacitated, like if they're under the influence. But I don't know, y'all. Like seriously, there is still like we still have work to do, but we've come a long way. And thanks to people like Lorena Bobbit, Gisele Pelicot, and the unnamed woman in France just this week. Again, Mississippi only can convict in the marital rape if forced is used, and it has to be forcible penetration against the victim's will. It does not include a person who is, oh cool, Gisele Pelicot would be fine in Mississippi. Let's see, Nevada, their marital rape requires force or threats must take place. If it does not involve force, then it's not considered rape. Cool. Great. Marital rape cases in Ohio only take the same precedence as non-marital ones if the two people don't live together. Oh my God. Oklahoma has to have a force or violence. But then they have this whole thing. Oh God. In Rhode Island, the state specifically points to the victim not being a spouse. Apparently one person married to another can still violate oh my God. In South Carolina, marital rape is a lesser crime than a non-spousal one. And in Virginia, where the Bobbits lived, perpetrators apparently have the chance to receive counseling. If they do, participating in therapy sessions acts as a replacement for punishment. Y'all, there's a lot of sources on this. Newsweek did one back in April of last year. They talk about Gavin Newsom, some of the states are actually trying to get rid of these loopholes, but they're still there, y'all. So we have come a long way. And I don't want to scare people right now out of all the things to worry about, but I do think every time something like this comes up and they're like, wow, before you start being like, wow, look at them, go look at your own state and your own country and what the laws are, because man, when you do that, you start realizing, oh my God, we're such hypocrites, right? And also, we just more and more appreciation for survivors, right? The reason why I do this work is because I survived all this stuff. And at a certain point, I realized that after my own work on myself, I realized that it makes me feel like, even though I never got justice, educating people and helping, move the needle a little bit through education, storytelling, and all this stuff. That's what I can do to feel like I got justice, right? So whether it's Lorena Bobbit, Gisele Pelicot, this woman in France, all of these, the Olympic gymnasts. And remember, I had Michelle, oh my God, I forgot her last name. One of the lawyers who took down Larry Nassar and represented a lot of the gymnasts. I had her on a live. It's on my Patreon. You can watch it at any time. I had her on, and I learned so much about how much we owe survivors for moving the needle. The Brock Turner case. If you haven't read the book by the survivor, Chanel, one of the best books I've ever read. One of the best books I've ever read. Support survivors, support creators and journalists and people who are talking about this, because change does come. It's just slow as hell. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. And if you can't afford that, join the Patreon. Comments, likes, shares, watch these videos of me and my mutuals. Even when you're not watching them, you can put on mute and just having them play. It's like that's how we get paid doing this stuff. Thank you for being here. Let me know your thoughts. If you have anything to add, or if I got it wrong, please tell me. And let me know if you heard the comment song. Auntie, comment song, yeah. This is the child of my good friend who's a single mom, and I love her baby like it's a nephew. We went to an old church that turned into a hotel with overpriced coffee. And look at this, it literally is a church, even has a confessional, but a cactus instead of a priest, because why not? It's funny. Look at these ceilings, look at this beauty. I'm trying to embrace art and beauty and children and all the things I love that give me hope instead of doom scrolling. I did a whole video on my Patreon about my amazing weekend, trying to be with people I love and see pretty things and not be on my phone looking at doom and gloom, because I will never be able to do this job other ways. Look at this game bar, this is View Leon, but I talk about it and my other stuff on my Patreon. Comment song. This was in that church hotel thingy. Look at this bench. Look at this. Look at this bench. Yeah, look at this bench. Just overpriced coffee that was like $5 or $6, but it was worth this view. Me and the baby, this makes me so happy. Connect with your community and art and joy and music and stuff. Support your artists and journalists and activists and people who you like to see doing this stuff, because it takes a lot to talk about this stuff. It's really hard, so we appreciate being here. And if you like this, let me know if you heard the anti-comment song. Take care of yourself, y'all. Et voila!